We are ready to go.
All righty. To our Schemmel Forum friends, welcome to the first World Affairs seminar of the 2021 spring semester. We pay tribute to Zoom, for if we didn't have it, we would have had to shut down Schemmel until the pandemic was over. We were not prepared to do that. And in particular, we probably would not have been able to take advantage of the wisdom of today's speaker, as he is based in Singapore. Let's toast to Zoom for delivering a Parag Khanna to us. In this dystopic time, we're especially in need of some creative thinking on the post-pandemic world. I met Parag several decades ago. I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, Parag, I believe it was at the American Academy in Berlin.
That's right.
Okay. I can say that he is I'm really serious about this. He is the most worldly person I know. He thinks about the present and its impact on the future. He poses these questions. What radical changes lie ahead in the post-pandemic world? How will the geopolitical and market competition play out in this new global scenario? He's going to take us with him, helping us look through the lens he is looking through, imagining what the changes will be and what they should be or might be. So Parag, it's all yours.
Sandra, delighted to see you again. It has been decades, literally, and it's been an honor all the collaborations we have had over these years. And indeed, I pay tribute to Zoom as well. The last year of all of our lives would probably have been radically different without these technologies. And they are certainly one of the consequences of this pandemic in terms of where the world will shift in a big step change in terms of digitization. But we'll get to that later. I'll build the case from here till now, from the present into the future. In this time of such serious uncertainty, what are the things that we can actually be confident about? And those are some of the ideas that I'd love to share with you, I guess evening your time, morning for me here on the other side of the world. Though I am a New Yorker, I'm an East Coaster. So I have, and I visited your lovely campus. So I do have some sense of the surroundings of your area and obviously what you've been going through the last year plus. So we can relate everything back to home. And I'll get to that as well. Let me share my screen. What I'll try to do is keep the presentation to just about half an hour so that we have plenty of time for a dialogue. Just let me know, please holler if you're seeing my slides pop up. Yes. Okay, great. So we'll talk about the post-pandemic world order, and with an emphasis on world. We should be global in how we understand what's happening, because we do tend to generalize from our own particular unique situational experience of being in the US or being on the East Coast or being proximate to New York and Washington. But the world is, of course, much larger than each of us. So what am I showing you here? This is from the Financial Times as of last October, showing which countries managed to maintain the lowest casualty count from COVID, and related to that, the lowest economic loss. And what you find is that there is a handful of countries that we would expect near the top, countries that we know very well: Finland, Denmark, Germany, the Scandinavian countries that are wealthy, that have welfare states, and so forth. But what you see in the top left are Vietnam and China, South Korea, Japan, even Singapore is up there where I live. Now, these are all Asian countries. And actually, almost all of them, except for Vietnam and China, are democracies. So, when we look at Asia, we tend to see China, and China is the biggest country in Asia. However, it's an authoritarian country, whereas South Korea and Japan and Taiwan are really the foremost democracies as well. So this is worth reflecting on. You know, we have democratic countries here that have done a much better job than we have or England has in coping with the pandemic. And this is going to set the stage for what comes next. Because after all, if we have societies whose economies have not suffered as much, that have maintained growth, that are investing in industry, whose people are healthy, obviously they have a leg up in the competition for global supply chains and financial flows and so forth in the years ahead. In fact, we could just pluck from last week's headline that China overtook the United States as the top destination for foreign investment in the year 2020. And that may recur or persist through this year as well. We don't know, too soon to tell. But let's not pretend that that has nothing to do with the pandemic and the performance in suppressing the pandemic, because of course it does. Now, China is also the largest trading partner of many countries in the region.
I put the Golden Gate Bridge on.
And indeed, the largest trade partner of many countries in the world. So as China has recovered economically, it has absorbed more exports from those countries, which means that it's helping them maintain that stability. So it's not just China that has done well, it's most of Asia as a whole. So now, if we think about this from a global standpoint, so the first slide was just highlighting how Asian countries have suppressed the pandemic and revived their economies. Now let's pan back to the global level. What we are moving into is a world that I call Continental Drift, right? North America is going its own way, Europe is going its own way, and Asia is going its own way. Now, that was actually kind of baked in. We've been seeing this regionalization, regionalism strengthen at the expense of globalization in some areas over the last 7 or 8 years. So why am I emphasizing 7 or 8 years? Well, I want to be clear that this is not about Trump per se. This has been a trend that relates to technology, that relates to opening up of trade relations more strongly with our neighbors, and other kinds of political and industrial policies. So for example, in North America, we've been having growing trade with Mexico and Canada since the NAFTA agreement, which is of course a couple of decades old. Even though President Trump talked about being anti-trade and anti-NAFTA, he actually signed the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, that further expands the trade and investment linkages between the 3 major countries of North America. So in fact, the US now trades more with Canada and more with Mexico than it does with China. Now that's a very, very good thing, right? It creates a degree of self-sufficiency in North America, and North America is, no matter what political troubles we may be having at any given time, we are the most self-sufficient continent in the world. North America has 500 million people roughly, 450, 500 million people, steady population growth, young people, lots of industry, lots of agriculture, lots of natural resources, and obviously technology innovation and money. Everything you need is there. Why not make the most of it? So it's the last several administrations that have been saying, let's start to consolidate our geography. And again, I support that. Sometimes I don't support the way it's being done, but as a geographer, I would say that's the smart trend to follow. And that is happening. And the Biden administration is reinforcing that in some ways. On the one hand, he may have immediately announced that he's going to switch off the XL Keystone pipeline, right? So that reduces the export volume of oil and gas from Canada to the United States, but he's going to be more open to automobile parts, pharmaceuticals, movement of talent and people, investment across borders, all of these things that are going to reinforce that. So I think that overall we'll see a healthy stabilization and deepening of North American relations. I'll just say a word about Europe. Europe has been for a long time the most trade integrated region of the world. The 70% of European trade is just within European countries, between European countries. Now, in the wake of the pandemic, Europeans are saying, let's get much more deeply integrated. Let's make sure that our policies, our stimulus, our subsidies are favoring European businesses, right? So that they get the upper hand, so that they can be more competitive in infrastructure, clean energy, technology, right? So the European way is to support those national champions. In fact, what they are saying is something that the Biden administration would like to do, something that's already happening in Europe, is if you want your company, whether it's an SME, a family business, or a global corporation, to get fiscal support from the government, from the European Union, you must be domiciled, registered, paying taxes, employing people in your home country in Europe, Germany, France, Denmark, what have you. There's nothing wrong with that either, right? So now there's Asia. As I mentioned, Asia is recovering quickly because it's contained COVID. It's recovering quickly because they also just ratified the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, this is the biggest trade zone on Earth, right? We're talking about 3.5 billion people. The largest populations, the largest economies are participating in this Pan-Asian agreement. So now, if you think about a world where transcontinental travel, where global supply chains and trade and goods are starting to reduce, even if it's temporary, neighbors will get more integrated with each other, and Asians are saying to each other, well, we also have lots of people, we have lots of money, we have lots of industry, we have lots of technology, we can innovate, let's just sell more to each other. And that's actually what helped Asia survive the global financial crisis of 2008, a decade ago. And that's what's helping Asia be more resilient now. So again, when you hear words like nearshoring, industrial policy, buy American, all of these kinds of things contribute to this bigger picture of what I'm calling continental drift. Now, I want to have, as mention, a caveat. Of course, we still have very robust globalization. Again, I am literally on the diametrically opposite side of the planet Earth from you right now, right? We have globalization. Globalization is alive and well. Globalization encompasses so many things, not just the things that we package in boxes and put inside a shipping container and put on a ship and sail across the ocean. That's not even 40% of the value of globalization. The cost of Sandra's Zoom subscription, and you add up all the Zoom subscriptions and how they're used, and the advertising on global platforms like Google is worth a lot more money than putting dishwashers into containers and loading them onto ships. And we do not quantify very well how powerful and how voluminous all of that digital and services and financial globalization is. But let me give you a case in point. One of the serious tensions between the United States and China right now is about capital mobility, right? The flows of investment. China is saying, hey, if you want to make some returns on a stock market, if you want high yield on bonds, Chinese government bonds are going for 3.5%. US bonds are like 1.5%, right? The American stock market is going to be very volatile, ups and downs. Chinese market's going to keep on growing because they've got these big companies, they control their own market and so forth. And if you want to access billions of consumers, register your company over in Asia, in China, right? Access our consumers, sell them insurance and retirement products. Now, Wall Street and your IRA and your 401k and your fund managers are saying, this is great. I need to deliver some yield. I need to deliver some returns. I need to pay out pensions. I want to ensure a healthy retirement for all of you. So I want to invest in the Chinese stock market. I want to buy Chinese government bonds. But guess what Congress is saying? No, 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 right? We're not going to let you, Wall Street, put trillions of dollars of American savings into Chinese companies because they're competitors, right? They're unfair in their trade practices, right? They're cheating us, and so on. We got a serious dilemma that, and this is the #1 central issue right now in the United States Senate, right? You've got Wall Street saying, hey, how am I going to fund the retirement of 80 million Americans unless I invest in Asia and China? And you've got Congress saying, don't you do that because they cheat. Who's going to win? This is the central debate right now. And I'm not sure there's a right or wrong answer, but I think we can debate it further. Now, let me just remind everyone about what I was saying about continental drift, right? The big bubbles and circles here show these regional clusters. North America, centered around the United States, Europe in blue, Asia in orange. The world is what you would call tripolar, right? There are 3 engines to the world economy, right? Africa and South America don't really matter that much. Their resources are important, but from a GDP standpoint, they're not very significant, right? So the North American engine, the European engine, and the Asian engine, these are the 3 engines that we want to be simultaneously growing and firing if we want to continue to have the overall economic pie growing. Now, Asia, as you can see, is much larger now than the rest. If you measure it in purchasing power parity terms, PPP is an economic instrument that helps you account for the value of an economy based on what things actually cost, right? So if I hire someone here to, repair my car or to fix something in my house, it costs about $50, right? It's the kind of thing that you might pay $300 or $400 for, right? Everything is cheaper in Asia because everything is made in Asia, right? So I'm sort of laughing a little bit when I say it. It's been true for a long time, but as an expat, I can tell you that the quality of life here is just magnificent, right? Tell your kids, tell your grandkids, they should go and travel and live and backpack and work somewhere in Asia. China, Japan, Korea, Australia, India, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, wherever. Come out here because you can save a lot of money. You can make a lot of money and you can save a lot of money and you pay low taxes and you learn foreign languages and cultures and you may work for an American company, right? The United States is the biggest investor all across the countries of this region, right? People buy General Motors cars. My neighbor down here works for Google and my neighbor down here works for Facebook, right? So, this is kind of why do you see these orange bubbles being so big? Because you've got the populations, you've got the investment, all of it is happening here. So we have to, as America, be part of that story. Sell here, invest here, grow here, in order for our companies to generate profits. Now, they should pay taxes in America so that those taxes can pay for better roads, bridges, hospitals, education, all of those things, right? That's a political issue. I'm making an economic point. We have sovereignty as a democracy over what rules we make, right? And we can urge that there be a fair policy where our global presence and our innovation benefits Americans, right? But economically, there won't be any money to distribute at all unless you've got a healthy economic relationship with Asia. Now, let me jump ahead. Europe, in the middle of this map, has already figured that out, right? Europe is so trade dependent. The percentage listed in the circles in the middle for each continent shows you just how much they depend on trade. Now, as I was saying before, the North America has bounteous abundance. North America does not really require trade with anyone, right? 14%, that's it. That's closer to zero than any other part of the world, right? Europe, however, is desperate to trade. Trade with each other, trade with Asia, trade with us, trade with everyone, right? Because they're smaller countries. They can't absorb all their own production. And they don't have enough people paying taxes to sustain themselves. They have to manufacture, export, sell, and so forth. In Asia, it's becoming similar also. So here you have, if you look on the upper right between the three circles, it says 1.6 trillion. 1.6 trillion is the value of annual trade between Europe and Asia. Now notice that is a lot more than the 1.1 trillion between Europe and North America, right? And the actual gap is even larger because it doesn't account for, again, all of the services, finance, and digital stuff that is accelerating these days. So, you know, we all of us on this call, we all grew up in a transatlantic world, right? A world in which America and Europe dominated the global system. We made the rules, we had the biggest economies, we had the biggest militaries, our alliances set the parameters, and we're at the top of the hierarchy, right? We've pretty quickly moved into a world that is more Eurasian, right? Where Europe and Asia are trading more with each other, investing more in each other, have more people going back and forth, their businesses doing more deals with each other, and so forth, right? So whereas we have this autarky, this self-sufficiency, they share a continent, right? Europe and Asia actually share a big mega continent, right? Eurasia. And they have spent the last 20 years, especially the last 10 years, growing closer and closer together. So this helps to explain why about 5 years ago, during the Obama administration, the Europeans agreed to join. Some European countries agreed to join the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. They agreed to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, the Obama administration was against this. The Obama administration was trying to convince these countries not to do it. And they are our allies, right? But they joined these Asian institutions anyway. And now we see that this process of kind of, Asian integration is likely to continue even further. So let me explain a bit more deeply how that is playing out in the domain of infrastructure, right? And here you see a map of some of the infrastructures that are part of not just China's Belt and Road Initiative, but more broadly, the efforts by many countries, China, Japan, India, and European countries, Europe is there off to the left, to build this connectivity across Eurasia. So the legend of the map is a little bit small to see, but you've got the pipelines, the railways, the internet cables, all of these kinds of things that are crisscrossing Eurasia and connecting these countries to each other so that they can trade more efficiently, so their people can move around, and so on and so forth. So this is just a sampling of how over the next 10 years, 20 years and beyond, you'll see a lot more pan-Asian integration. Now, this is not going to happen without pushback, right? We're not the only ones who are suspicious of China. I can name you a few countries that have been suspicious of China for about 3,000 years, right? Like Japan, like India, like Vietnam. We do not need to lecture Asians that China is a threat. They've known that for a long time. However, they are China's neighbors. They share that geography, and that geography is not going to change, right? So simply telling countries, hey, you shouldn't deal with Huawei, that telecommunications company, and hey, you shouldn't borrow money from China, that's not really gonna help, right? Because if your neighbor is still your neighbor, right? You still share the same air with them, same water supply and rivers, and all of these other things. Plus, you depend on them for trade, after all, right? So what are we going to do? How do you make sure that, to paraphrase the ancient saying, all roads lead to Rome, how do you make sure all roads don't lead to China? Well, the simple answer is you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? You have to help these countries have opportunities in the marketplace of finance, geopolitics, and so on. And this is, I provided you something of a laundry list of initiatives that Americans, Europeans, and others have launched to try to diminish dependence on China. So for example, the US has launched something called the International Finance and Development Corporation, IFDC. And they have something called the Mission Clean Network, right? Help countries modify their technology infrastructure, their telecoms, their internet cables, so that it doesn't depend on Chinese companies, right? That's an example right there. Then there's something called the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative, right? With Japan, Australia, and India, just to pull semiconductors, telecoms, pharmaceuticals, car parts, get that out of China too, right? Let those be made in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in India, in South Korea, in Japan. That's another example. Then infrastructure. These countries that I showed you on the previous map really need quality infrastructure. They need, again, they need roads and railways and internet cables and stuff like that. You have to participate in what I call the infrastructure arms race. Lend to them at competitive rates. Let them borrow from us rather than borrowing from China. Help them to grow their economies, to modernize, to become more sustainable, and to pay us back for our loans, right? So these are the kinds of things that need to happen in order for us to not just be wringing our hands 10 years from now that we lost Asia and Europe to China, because we don't have to. There's nothing inevitable in the world. Now, let's talk about just quickly about some of the big changes that are going to occur in the wake of COVID. I mentioned robotics and automation, right? So a lot of countries have labor shortages, and workers couldn't go to factories, to their jobs during the pandemic. So what companies are doing is saying, you know what? Let's invest more in robots. Let's get robots to do this work. So you'll see a lot more investments in industrial automation. And you can see the Koreans and the Germans and Japanese and other countries already doing that, so that they could make their cars robotically should there be another pandemic, or even if there's not another pandemic, they want to do so because they have an aging workforce and they don't want to pay so much money for human labor. So that's one thing. Another is artificial intelligence. You can walk into grocery stores today and there's no humans, right? Everything is digital. You can pick an item out of a fridge or whatever and scan it, and then it's automatically paid from your credit card and off you go, right? So AI for delivery. We've got major robots like Waymo and Starship. These are companies, I'll show you a picture in just a second. They're delivery bots, right? Amazon is buying these automated delivery companies as well. Drones flying around, and precision guided drone delivery of a carton of milk right to your doorstep. This kind of stuff is also happening too. Then we've got obviously biomedical technologies, right? So obviously vaccine companies, drug distribution, pharmaceuticals, healthcare monitoring, apps and wearable devices, Apple Watches that can sense everything that's going on in your body and send the data straight to your doctor. All of these technologies are also growing very quickly. Clean energy, right? Wastewater recycling, water desalination, hydrogen power, solar power, nuclear power, fusion power, investments in all of these areas, not only so that we can ward off and start to slow down climate change, but also so that we can have more sustainable economies and less dependence on importing oil and gas from the Middle East or Africa, Canada, or wherever. And then agricultural technology. This is obviously very, very important. During the pandemic, one of the things that happened was that borders were closed. So food was rotting. Food was rotting even within our borders. I saw a television segment about potatoes from, I think it was Idaho or Montana, hundreds of tons of potatoes that rotted because we couldn't deliver and distribute them during the pandemic. There were worker shortages and stuff like this. But if you can use robotic technology to grow food or grow it in these labs that are powered by sort of hydroponic and aquaponic technology, and if you can automate that delivery, you don't have to have interruptions in the food supply. And you can better monitor and test and trace the quality of food and so on and so forth. Then, of course, digital, right? So we paid our tribute to Zoom, but there's 1,000 other technology companies that are doing digital logistics, digital communications, digital education, digital entertainment, digital fitness, everything you're starting to do between, standing in front of your computer. Now, I don't think that's a permanent condition because the pandemic will eventually go away. But we have the capacity, the capability to digitize so much more of our work and education than we have before. For example, prior to the pandemic, approximately 4% of the workforce was remote and digital and telecommuting. Now they say it could go up eventually to 40%, right? Well, that's a really big shift if you think about it, not just on the US basis, but globally. I mentioned here, well, this will mean that maybe many more people will just move to the suburbs. And indeed, we've seen in the last 1 year already, that's what's been happening. The housing market for buying second homes or new homes in the suburbs has gone through the roof. Here on your upper left, you see a very cute little robot called Starship. It's actually made in the country of Estonia, and they make this robot, and it drives around. It follows the GPS. It knows to stay on a fixed pathway, and it delivers, whatever you want straight to your door. This photo was taken somewhere in Virginia. And now let's get to the final point about what does this mean for human migration? Because the pandemic isn't the only reason that things are changing, right? We've got climate change. We've got economic inequality. We've got robotics and automation, technology. There we've got political unrest. We've got people in red states wanting to move to blue states, people in blue states wanting to move to red states. And let me come back to climate change. We have a problem, which if we don't get under control, is going to make it more and more difficult for people to stay living where they are. So why do people move more broadly? Well, the reasons include what I've listed on the upper left. Got labor shortages and demographic imbalances, right? Young people that are needed in countries that are aging to be part of the labor force. We've got the political unrest and civil wars, economic crises, automation, climate change, pandemic. These are the major reasons why people move. And what are we looking for? Especially, 4 billion people in the world are young, and the youth of the world right now are struggling, economically. They're single, they're mobile, they don't have kids, they're looking for jobs, they want a high quality of life. So they want these things that I've listed on the lower left. So people are going to be moving from north to south, east to west, west to east, and so forth in the years ahead towards these sort of green zones, right? And as you can see, a lot of the US does not fall in the green zone. Here's some data taken from NASA's forecasts about what's called the climate niche. for the last 10,000 years, since the last ice age retreated, generally speaking, humans have been able to inhabit the geographies that we're in right now. Not least, of course, the civilizations of the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Incas through Mexico, Central America, South America, and of course, Southern Europe and the Mediterranean and other geographies. But if you take just the United States, just North America, you see this climate niche is migrating, right? As temperatures rise and we have droughts in the Southwest and rivers are running dry and so forth. So this highlighted area around the US-Canada border kind of becomes, and I think you've got you've got most of Pennsylvania in there. Phew, that's good news. So we're still within the climate niche. But we are 330 million people, and the current population of that climate niche area, or that future climate niche area, is like not even 30 or 40 million people, right? Maybe 50. So how are we going to resort ourselves as a population? Are we going to move everyone to these verdant areas? Agriculture will suddenly be thriving in Canada and less in America. Or are we going to build new infrastructures to move water? Are we going to build glass domes and greenhouses to live in? Are we going to do more water desalination? All of these issues we have to think about and resolve in the years ahead if climate change remains unchecked. And I don't know the answer to where that's going to head, where that situation is headed. And there's a lot of big questions that lie ahead, and climate change is just one of the ones that we've not neglected, but to some degree been able to put off to the side during this pandemic. But it's not going away, nor is the politics, nor is the economics, nor is the technology. We have to have a holistic and complex view, if you will, of these issues in order to solve one of them. Just like people have said, we won't be able to overcome the pandemic until everyone is vaccinated, right? For us to be secure, everyone has to be secure, so to speak. Well, the same is true with global problems. You can't solve just one of them. You have to think about all of them because they're all connected to each other. So that, in a nutshell, is the post-pandemic world. It's much more complex than the world before the pandemic, and it remains to be seen if we're going to be able to grapple with, to cope with that complexity, to get ahead of it in a way that we can ultimately have a more resilient global civilization. So let me stop right there. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Paula, can you unmute?
Why are there so many scammers coming from India?
Oh, you mean like digital scams?
Yes.
Well, believe it or not, it's mostly American companies that are hiring these call center workers in India because it's very cheap and they are connected by internet connections. So just like I'm talking to you from the other side of the world, they can call you from there and make it seem like they're right next door and sell you something you don't want. But they're physically in India, but they're being hired by Americans. So in the same way that Russians hired Macedonians to use Facebook to send out fake news and try to manipulate our election, anyone can do anything unless you regulate it, unless you pass laws, unless you block it, and that kind of thing. So, Indians themselves don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I rip off people on the other side of the world? They have to have something to sell them. And if they want to sell you a broken product or something like that, chances are it's something that's actually something that's in the US. So they're using each other in a way. But I think that we need to have laws against these kinds of things.
Another question?
I have a question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Parag, thank you so much for what you've talked about. I wanted to ask a question and get your opinion on this. We've seen a sort of worldwide trend in parts of Asia and parts of the United States, as well as, I suppose you could say, some parts of Europe, towards authoritarian styles of governing. And I wondered if you had any opinions on how that trend is going to influence some of these other things. Like what you were talking about, the regionalization of the economies that we've seen. I mean, do you see those two things as being connected?
Well, it's a very, very good question. So let me go back to a couple of things. First of all, as I mentioned just very early on, more people in Asia live in democracies than non-democracies, right? India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, they're not perfect countries, right? But they're democracies. And then you've got Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. And then you've got Australia and New Zealand, which are culturally Western, but of course are foremost democracies and are here in this geography. So There's still way more people living in democratic states than non-democratic states, right? Within democracies, places like Indonesia, or India, you do see a trend towards more strongman kind of rule. Some would say semi-authoritarian, right? They're bending rules, they're breaking laws, they're trying to get their way. They're doing some stuff that Trump tried to do, or they're getting away with it. But these countries are still fundamentally democratic, and they're going to stay democratic. The reason the people still support those leaders is because those are very poor countries. When Prime Minister Modi in India is saying, look, I'm going to build you roads, I'm going to build you hospitals, I'm going to build you schools, I'm going to clean the streets. No one has done that in like 70 years. Oh. So sure, the guy is a bit of a thug. I wouldn't deny it. I was born there in that country. I have relatives there. I know what goes on there. He's a thug, but he's also better than the useless, babies that were running the country before, that never got anything done. Your choices here are not between, Winston Churchill or John F. Kennedy, and whatever. You've got to pick from what you've got. That's what democracy is about, right? So, he's better than the alternatives for now. And hopefully, because I do believe it will stay a democracy, candidates will step up and challenge. So I'm not really that worried about the so-called authoritarian turn, right? You've got emergency situations, you've got big challenges, you've got things that need to be done, not just today, but things you need to continue to be doing 10 years from now. For example, let me bring it back home. When Obama was elected, it was in the wake of the financial crisis. People said, infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. We need shovel-ready jobs. We need to build high-speed railways. Now, and I know, we do not have a single kilometer of high-speed rail in America. It's been 13 years since Barack Obama was elected. It's been 20 years since we knew that we needed better transportation systems in the country. It hasn't happened, right? Now, if I were a poor Indian or a poor Indonesian or a poor Filipino, I'd vote for the guy who actually put the shovel in the ground, right? Who actually started to get those things done. So you don't need a PhD in political science. You don't need to speak Tagalog. You don't need to be an anthropologist to understand why these leaders are getting elected. It's material, it's basic, it's visceral, it's the economy, stupid, right? As Clinton famously said when I was a sort of teenager. And so, I think we should focus less on whether we think they're bad guys or good guys. Are they authoritarian or not? Are they to the right of us or the left of us? Let's look at the human condition.
No.
Are people's lives getting better? Are they getting educated? Let me give you one little anecdote. That the thug who's the president of the Philippines, right, Mr. Duterte, right, who praises the fact that he pushed a guy out of a helicopter and killed him, right? I'll tell you something else he did. He passed a law saying that every child should be allowed to have a K through 12 education. Now, the guy who was president before him studied in the United States, had a Ph.D., you know, spoke English very well, was the talk of the town, right? Goes to Davos meetings and, you know, fancy summits, hangs out in the White House when he visits America. How come that guy never passed a law saying Filipino children deserve a right to go to school? How come he didn't get around to that? I find that embarrassing, right? And I like that guy. But I gotta say, if I were a Filipino, I'd probably cast my vote for the thug, because the thug said everyone's going to school.
Oh.
So let's be humane about this. Let's measure outcomes. Let's look at results. Did something get done, something good for the people? Not just did we like him or not like him.
Okay. Because I mean, what I hear you saying though is that just because a government in a particular region or country is authoritarian doesn't necessarily mean that they are protectionists or are not doing these infrastructure projects. That there's a kind of these two issues can be separated in a certain way. That authoritarianism is one issue, but whether or not countries are engaging in trade and opening up their economies, that doesn't track with whether or not they're authoritarian.
Well, so it's very interesting you say it, because let's remember that the pro-trade countries of the world, the countries that are benefiting the most from trade, signing the trade agreements, opening up their borders, welcoming investment, those countries are Vietnam and they are, you know, China, right? So you know, so it doesn't really correlate. In other words, it's not just democracy. Democracies are becoming protectionist, right? Because
so I understand you are.
revolting.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Hey, Maggie, go ahead. I think you have a question there. Go ahead.
My question is, when you talk about the migration of peoples around the world and, you know, consider Northern North America to be verdant space, does that migration for global warming necessarily mean that there will be more jobs in those parts of the world, or is it people will be moving for global warming and not jobs?
It's a good question. So I think it's actually these things reinforce each other, right? And therefore, you know, where people move, jobs are created, right? And maybe we'll start creating jobs where people are moving. So look at the housing market, right? People want to live in places where the weather is predictable. So maybe the big construction companies and real estate developers will start to build property in those places. And then you'll have towns and you'll have roads and you'll have schools and you'll have hospitals and you'll have movie theaters and that kind of thing. So that's what's likely going to happen.
Thank you.
Dr. Tracy, you have a question there.
Yeah, I do. First of all, this was exceptionally good. And we really thank you. You're very, very clear. And you made it very interesting. But I just wanted your observation on this and not getting into politics. I'm so tired of politics now. But this tendency, I believe we've had in this country over the last several years, rightly or wrong, seem to be one of disengagement from worldwide participation. I use the World Health Organization and our trade agreements. Make America great again, bring everything back. It seemed to be the antithesis of the free market type thing in trade. With that as a preamble, do you see any help from the United Nations or some stabilizing type super governmental type thing, like the UN, like the WHO, which may try to bring us all closer together again, and I hope reverse this tendency that we had, that we're going to isolate ourselves from the world. Sorry, long question.
No, great question, great question. So, you know, there are about 250 international organizations, the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, so many. The ones that really matter on these issues are ones like the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization has done its job. Global tariffs are very, very, very low, right? Companies like Boeing and Airbus sue each other over minor infractions of the rules. But the rules are there, right? Over the last 100 years, global tariffs have come down by like 97%, right? They're closer to zero than they are to anything meaningful as a result of one international organization, the WTO. However, then there's the International Monetary Fund. Right now, the International Monetary Fund has lent $1 trillion to governments around the world that are desperate to borrow money, to have money, to pay for medical care, job security, wage support, their versions of our paycheck protection program, right? So, you know, these organizations really matter, and they're helping. But fundamentally, each country does retain the right to, to make its own policy, to say, you know what, if China and Asia are sucking away our jobs and selling us back stuff that we could have made that's really cheap, and they pay their workers nothing, and then suddenly they have all the savings and they have all the profits, and we're left borrowing money to buy stuff that they made, you got a problem. Right? So all things in moderation, as Oscar Wilde famously said, right? What is the balance, you know, between us and them? Because we do still need each other, right? It really does make more sense for them to be making the rubber duckies, right? And the toys. It really does, right? But what are the things that we should make for ourselves to avoid dependency, to create jobs, to be innovative, all of those kinds of things. And, you know, when we lower the temperature and not make this so political, but instead say, okay, well, you know, our vineyards are not as good for wine as the French vineyards. Okay, let's buy their wine, right? But we can get batteries and make electric cars, and we should be doing more of that. Well, let's make sure that they're not going to fleece us and dominate that market. Right, so it's all about finding that balance. There are things we should do, things we shouldn't do, and we should go through that mechanical, technocratic, boring exercise rigorously, instead of saying China is evil, we need to have a war with China. It's really not going to help us, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, Sandra, you can unmute. Go ahead and unmute. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm ceding my space to Maury. He has a question.
Okay, Parag, you identified many of the leading democracies in the world are in Asia, in reference to Japan, India, etc. But I want to ask you in a personal way about one political sovereign that has been identified as rather extreme in terms of its violation of human conduct, and that's Singapore. And I'd like to ask you, is that still the case? And how does an American living there adapt to those kinds of restrictions?
Right. So I do live in Singapore. I've been here, my goodness, like seven-ish years. We've done sabbaticals in Europe and stuff, but you know, this has become home. It's home to tens of thousands of Americans, if more, actually. And I'm going to be very, very honest with you, because I know this country very well, and obviously I know America pretty well too, and even served in the Defense Department. But let me tell you, life here is really good, and there are trade-offs, right? You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You also should not insult people of other religions. You shouldn't criticize the government unless you have a factual reason for doing so. If you have a factual reason for doing so, you're actually okay. Because again, this is a former British colony. They have a parliamentary system. They have rule of law. They have independent courts. Every senior person here was educated at Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard or Stanford. These are humane and decent and cultured people. They, according to independent and objective rankings like the World Bank, this is the least corrupt country on the face of the earth, right? Next to Finland, the friendly Finns way up there, they are uncorruptible. And these people who are, the leadership of the country I live in are literally like that, right? And they're actually much better educated than the Europeans, quite frankly, right? They're mathematicians. The prime minister of this country is a mathematician. He posts his code on the internet for fun. That's the kind of person who runs this place. So yes, there are the kinds of restrictions that we're not used to. That doesn't make them bad restrictions per se, right? So for example, if they say, hey, everyone wear a mask because we don't want one person inadvertently killing another person, you know what? I'm going to go along with that, right? They say no guns, right? Like nobody here owns a gun. You cannot have a gun. Now, you may be a supporter of the Second Amendment. You may believe that in your circumstances in Pennsylvania or Illinois or wherever that you would be useful for you to have a gun, or that you may need to raise a militia to defend the country. And I don't disagree that hypothetically you yourself personally might need a gun. However, in this country, no one needs a gun. And nobody needs a gun because nobody else has a gun. And therefore, I'm pretty happy with that, right? I've got 2 little kids, and in this country, you can put a 6-year-old in a taxi by himself or herself. You can send them to walk the dog. You can send them to buy the milk, and no one would think twice, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with this system, right? Because it works here. I'm not going to say that America needs to be like Singapore. I'm not going to say that America needs to be like China. I'm going to say that there's a hell of a lot that in the situation we're in right now in the US, we could learn from 26 other countries, right? And for each and every little problem that we have, there is another country that maybe has figured out how to fix that little thing a little bit better. For example, we could use a 3rd political party or a 4th. Well, I can name you 60 countries that have multi-party systems, and those run pretty well. So for each and every little thing, there is someone out there who's thought about it, who's experimented with it, who's implemented it, and we could borrow from those examples.
Thank you.
I'll ask a question. Do you think, the mindset of Americans, well, you are an American, the conflicts, the sense of conflict seems so pervasive, not just here, but in a lot of the world. So if it's the idea of sharing and taking things, developing really robust relationships, would it take a lot of, I don't know what, psychiatry or ethics courses or whatever to kind of, lighten that kind of hostility?
Whew. I mean, psychoanalysis, yes, but ultimately, I mean, you still have to go out and, you still have to go out and make the changes, right? You still have to get the consensus and the agreement. Now, here's what I would say on the bright side. If you took a group of Republicans and Democrats and put them in separate rooms and said, make a list of stuff that you really want done. They might agree, like, we need better infrastructure, our schools need to keep up, I want fast internet access, whatever, we want to make sure that we get good medical care as we're aging and sort of, and you took a bunch of Democrats and put them in a room and said, what do we need to do? You'd probably have the same list, right?
Mhm.
So, fundamentally, we can have like a national civic consensus on the most important issues. And so the question is just, like getting it done. And getting some of these things done requires more than a 2-year, 4-year cycle. I mean, if all we're talking about now is who's going to win, is the House going to, or the Senate tip again in, 2022, it's like, oi, we've got to think about these things. These things take 10 years to fix, and we needed to have started 10 years ago. So what you need to do, and this is again one of these areas where other countries have valuable lessons, once you agree you're going to do something like build a road, you don't half build the road. You put it to the side. You say, okay, here's the money. We've agreed we're going to build these highways. Put the money off into an escrow, have it independently managed. No one can touch it, fingers off the cookie jar kind of thing. And other countries actually do that, and it's not exactly, again, it's not rocket science, right? It's just good governance.
Mhm.
So, yes, it can be done. It can be done.
Good. Any other questions? Well,
Question.
yes,
Yes,
question?
Joe has a question,
Okay.
wherever Joe is. Hello?
We know Joe.
Yes. Should I go ahead and ask my question?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. Okay.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
tremendous presentation. Talk about a big picture view of the planet and the human beings on it. My question is somewhat specific. It involves China and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or that treaty that we were in and then we were out. I'm not even sure. I haven't even read anything about it recently. What is your opinion on that? I mean, the United States, I think, bailed on it, supposedly ceding all that trade to China.
So the short answer is, the people view these trade agreements as if they're rival blocks, Trans-Pacific Partnership, Obama couldn't pass it, Trump rejected it, Biden doesn't want it. Then regional comprehensive economic partnership. China is leading it, all the Asians rally around. But the truth is, trade agreements are more like a spider web. They actually do connect to each other. So for example, when the US did not join TPP, there are countries with whom it does have bilateral preferential agreements, like the Philippines. So countries in Asia started moving their production to the Philippines so they could still get it into the United States cheaply. So, these things are actually, it's like a big shell game going on. It's not really about one dominating and the other abdicating. But let me tell you one iron law of history. If you want to win, join as many trade agreements as you possibly can, right? Because you never know where the markets are going to be, where the growth is going to be, where it's cheaper to produce, and this kind of thing. Openness wins, because openness is not about selling yourself out. Openness is about having multi-directional options for all of your exports and having them be super competitive. So that is the message. And again, it's a positive message. We've got to remember who the biggest winner in human history is from trade, from openness, from immigration, right? It's America, newsflash, right? So it doesn't mean though, no rules, no controls, unfair competition, bend over and take the cheating from China. No, right? Openness, but demand reciprocity. Perhaps, and we can end on this. This is the one word that I like to convey. Most important word, in the bedrock of all international relations, of all diplomacy, of all geopolitics is reciprocity. You don't have reciprocity, people are going to scream foul, right? You've got to have reciprocity. And right now, the Europeans, that's the word they use the most, because they cut this deal with China in December on investment, and we've been whacking them for it, raking them over the coals. How dare you do this before Biden took office? Why didn't you coordinate with Biden in passing this investment agreement with China? They said, hey, we signed an agreement that demands reciprocity. You want to do the same, go ahead, right? All that matters is reciprocity. And the good news is it's not hard to figure out how that works, because international relations is actually a lot like interpersonal relations, you know? And I think we need to think about these kinds of things and apply them rather than getting, again, overly political and worked up. So, you know, with that, I mean, that thought hopefully helps us, again, think about, okay, how do we want to handle the next 2 years, the next 4 years, right? You know, what can we do better? How can we focus on substance rather than style? And that's probably what we need a bit more of right now. So thank you again so much.
Yeah. Well, Parag, I think it's a wonderful note to end on. I just want to say one little thing, that not so little. Joe Biden kind of described us as a place with possibilities. And I think that reciprocity is something that we can do. It's possible. And I want to thank you for bringing it up. This has been energizing and delightful to hear. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. So nice to see you. Have a great evening.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. It was good.
Mhm.